Okay, just wanted to briefly welcome you to this event. Thank you all for coming on this beautiful spring afternoon. Wanted to give a little introduction to this, and so I'll just launch in. We're going to have four panelists who you can see here, and I will introduce them as I finish up. Yesterday at dinner with our son and daughter-in-law in Winnetka, our daughter-in-law told a funny story about a young matron she knows who was raised here in Lake Forest and who now lives in Winnetka. As it was told, the young woman wanted to change the numbers on her house and kept calling the village office about the process for getting approval. Finally, she was told that Winnetka was much more relaxed about all that than Lake Forest, and she should just go ahead and do what she thought best. This myth about Lake Forest, the impenetrability and the invasiveness of the arcane rules and regulations, is what we are here to dispel this afternoon. I also recently saw a film about Stephen Hawking, The Theory of Everything, his career-long quest at great odds due to his grave health issues. And there was one simple equation he sought to explain black holes in the universe, and for the essence of time. Well, our panel this afternoon will give different perspectives on the processes for making changes here locally. But I want to provide at the outset, one, to use Stephen Hawking's word, elegant formula for understanding Lake Forest and also for making changes here. It is no black hole, my friends. That formula, that secret decoder ring, quite simply, is classic harmony. As expressed in our local ordinances taken from the 1970s U.S. Department of Interior Standards, this is termed compatibility. For a social analogy for harmony and compatibility, it is like dressing for a party here, wearing something that fits in and meets the standards for quality, but has just enough individuality to gain mild appreciation, never showing off, though. Is that complicated? I have two handouts for you out there that you can pick up as you go. The first is 15 years old, from the late 1990s and mid-2000s building boom, a phenomenon that shows signs of recurring now. This three-pager, taken from the College Library's Archives Digital Collections website, outlines with local examples the essential classic characteristics here from the last half century, from the half century that was between the 1893 World's Fair and World War II. At the bottom of the second page, and continuing on the third page too, it integrates discussion of this community harmony I'm talking about to a larger outline of classic design elements around us. The second handout is about our street, Wildwood Road, and its evolution and transformation over the centuries since it was laid out in 1914. With small houses close together on narrow lots, 1 block long, Wildwood Road off of Illinois near the college campus still is anchored by a series of houses where the styles vary, but the roof pitches, sightings, materials all convey an overall unity and harmony or compatibility. There's variation in scale from 1 to 2.5 stories and in styles from Tudor, English arts and crafts, and colonial to vernacular farmhouse, bungalow, and split level. But by and large, it all works together to form a harmonious streetscape, even though it has been redeveloped mostly since the 1970s. I give this personal example to show how the Building Review Board overseen process has worked to upgrade obsolete housing on one former estate support community block. This street also shares two key characteristics with the historic districts overseen by the Historic Preservation Commission. First, essentially all of these changes reflect a need to add two traditional home layouts, a Frank Lloyd Wrightian 1930s Usonian or organic plan around the kitchen, an integrated family room. Second, there has been a need to add garaging space from 1 to 2 garage bays for smaller houses, and for larger historic ones, even more such spaces, and we'll see examples with Guy's presentation. I know there are also master suites, spas, pools, gardens, follies, and more, but so much of what goes on beyond routine repairs and maintenance, which we all will have this spring, has been driven by finding fallacious solutions to these two challenges, both free-flowing family living space additions, and more garage bays. Our panelists will talk about how we make all this work, how we move beyond a simple formula, streetscape harmony, and simple basic needs for family rooms and garages to viable and neighborhood-compatible projects. Our goal, to dispel right here today that Winnetka myth of Lake Forest's unfathomable complexity and invasive meddling. Beyond understanding my secret formula, now unveiled, what are the keys? These include, as represented here on our panel, informed insight into the city's processes, getting from the outset high-quality design help, and for historic homes, perhaps employing financial tools uniquely available in a town like this. Finally, on this panel of four, one 2 decades owner of a 1892 built historic and significant home by Halliburton and Roche will discuss her successful experience preserving and living there. Our panel discussion will be followed by a reception where you can interact with our experts and also an opportunity to tour a model renovation example, the current remodeling here in Gorton Community Center, with an excellent architect, Stephen Wright. Where's our Stephen Wright? He's here, I saw him. Ta-da! Stand up. Okay, so hold up, Stephen Wright. Stephen Wright. Okay, and Gorton's able executive director, Brenda Dick. Is she here yet? No. Just as an aside, if Whole Foods had worked with Steve Wright, who designed the Pactiv headquarters across Route 60 from their site, they'd be opening their store on that spot later this year. Our panelists then are listed on the schedule that some of you picked up, and with correct titles they are, and I don't have them right here because I handed it away. Can I have one of those to introduce everybody? Kathy Czerniak is handing me her schedule, and she has been on the city staff since 1997 as senior planner, and then in 2002 became the director of community development. Guy Berg is architectural designer with Melichar Associates, 2.5 decades of experience in construction and architectural design, and he's a Lake Forest board member and a recovering member of the City Historic Preservation Commission and Building Review Board, right? Yes. Suzanne Germann, she's a former city staff member of the City of Lake Forest who was apotheosized to the Landmarks Illinois in Chicago, where she is director of grants and easements, and she's going to tell us about the possibilities for financial benefits for renovation. Ingrid Bryzinski at the end is a homeowner of this historic 1892 Halliburton Roche Tuttle house at 941 East Westminster, and she's a Lake Forest Preservation Foundation board member, and she's worked with different people who've helped, and she's going to give her experience of success in preserving and also living in what she preserved. So we're going to have after that a chance to interact and have questions. Between 3 and 3:30, we will 3 and 3:15, we'll have a chance to have a reception in the back, interact with some of the speakers and ask questions, and also tour the renovations here with Steve, who's here now, and probably Brenda, who will come later. And you'll be able to see what's going on here and learn more about that. So without more ado, I'll turn over this microphone to Catherine, to make her presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to look out at friendly faces, and as I thought about what I could talk about today, certainly a very different presentation to this group than to some other types of groups. So I really am going to focus today on how we as a community can really help to communicate the value of preservation. So not get into specifics, but really stay pretty high level. So an overview. The whole discussion of preservation, in my opinion, really needs to be an ongoing community conversation. People change, people on our boards and commissions change, aldermen change, staff changes, our residents change, business owners, property owners change, some people involved in local institutions change, and it's a conversation you never get to the finish line. You have to keep having that. You have to continue to raise awareness about preservation. You have to continue to provide educational opportunities, provide resources, assistance, and many of you in this room do that on an ongoing basis. I think importantly, probably now more than ever, we need to think creatively about historic properties, about unique opportunities. If you look back, the city of Lake Forest has done that continually. If you look at things that we've done with Eloa Farm or with this building, or with various properties in the community, the city has a tradition of thinking creatively and not being afraid of change, but carefully considering how that change occurs. And as the Preservation Foundation does so well, it's really important to recognize, reward, and celebrate preservation in our community, preservation successes. You wouldn't be in this room if you didn't already know that Lake Forest is a special place, and I hear a lot of people say that, but sometimes I think we have to remind people about why it's a special place. It's not unusual for a new home buyer to come in, or an architect or a builder to come in and rave about Lake Forest and how they came to town and they just were so impressed and fell in love with it, and then roll out a set of plans that have nothing to do with Lake Forest. And sometimes it's just so important to step back and remind people, what is it about Lake Forest that you found so appealing? When you drove down the tree-lined streets, or when you saw homes that were appropriately scaled, thoughtfully designed with appropriate materials, and try and rein people back in to say, you know, if you really want to be part of this community, it needs to be done in a way that really evokes the very things that brought you to this community. Lake Forest, as you all know, has a very long tradition of special ordinances, of boards and commission processes, and I believe that in every case, projects that come before boards and commissions, if there's a willing and an interested property owner and willing and interested design professionals, those projects get better. Some projects come in at this point, and it would be great if we could move them to this point, but even if we've slid them a little bit along that continuum, we've done a lot to support the traditions in this community. It's really important to link on a continual basis the property values and the stability of property values generally, if you discount the last few years, but generally to the efforts this community has made at careful planning and really looking at ways to preserve community character and important historic resources. The community involvement has been a really key piece. When I came to this community, I was just amazed at the number of people who volunteer their time, the number of people, and there's several of you in this room who have been on boards and commissions. And although sometimes those meetings can be painful, and there are nights when I'm locking the door at City Hall thinking, what in the heck am I doing here? But I do think the value of the community members being involved is so important. And as people in the community who are interested in preservation, continuing to encourage others to volunteer for boards and commissions, to become an alderman, you know, to take over as mayor someday. It's so important because the people on those boards and commissions and the people on the city council set the policies. And without the political will to continue the planning processes, to continue to support the boards and commissions, the whole thing really falls apart. So it's that educating, it's making sure that people step forward who care about this community. The purple, the green, and the blue are historic districts. The other properties are either local landmarks or individual districts. But the message again is, we know Lake Forest is a special place, but communicating why it is a special place and what it takes to maintain that. Talking about what distinguishes Lake Forest from other communities. There are a lot of North Shore communities, there are a lot of other communities, and Lake Forest really has a different character. It has a different history. It came together for different reasons. And continuing to distinguish Lake Forest as a unique place in the long term really will help people to choose this community who really value the traditions of the community. To make it clear that incremental change that's done in an inappropriate way, whether it's an ill-conceived addition to a home in a small neighborhood, whether it's a significant decision about development of a large parcel, whether it's a decision about what happens to one of our community buildings. Those incremental changes, maybe if you look at each individually, probably not a big deal, but those incremental changes at some point, you've gotten to the point where there is a wholesale change. And once you make that change, there really isn't any opportunity to go back. So that's why, even though we sometimes get criticized for it, that's why I think the boards and commissions do take the time on small projects to really try and get those right, so that we're not setting a precedent for projects that perhaps don't quite meet the standards. It's certainly been on more than one occasion that someone has says, well, did you see what they did on that property? Why can't I do this on mine? So it does come back to haunt us. And shared responsibility. Certainly the city often gets into the process at the end. And so later I will mention what I like to call early intervention, and that's where I think you as people who are interested in the community and interested in preservation could really continue to help the community out in that way. Building relationships. In real estate, you hear about location, location, location. I think in preservation, it's relationships, relationships, and relationships. To talk with property owners and residents and business owners and real estate professionals and architects and contractors and help them understand why it's important, but also help them to know that they're supported and help them to know that it's not any of these groups working against the other, but it's everyone coming together. From the city's perspective, we try and make resources and assistance available. We aren't in a position to redesign projects. That's simply not our role. So we do have to rely on communicating who are architects in the community, who are contractors that really have demonstrated again and again that they produce high quality projects. Those projects that come in well designed move through the process very quickly. And of course, no one hears about those. It's the projects that perhaps come in and need a lot of work that generate so much of the negativity, as Art said. And it's certainly on more than one occasion that I hear from realtors or I hear from potential buyers who hear from realtors that don't try and do that in Lake Forest, it'll never get through. And my sense is that couldn't be further from the truth. If you come in with a strong project, a well-designed project, a well-detailed project, those projects move through the process very, very quickly. Just to mention, we do try and provide information on our website, maps, survey data. Our geographic information system is becoming more interactive, certainly with the help of staff members such as Suzanne when she was here and others. We've developed design guidelines that try and offer information and direction without trying to redesign someone's project. We certainly promote whenever we can that there are resources in the community. Lake Forest Preservation Foundation offers many programs, as you all know, and the Lake Bluff Historical Society is a great resource for information on properties. As we look forward, are there more opportunities to target home buyers? We continue to hear that all people want is new. I was at a presentation where there was a panel of local realtors speaking, and every single one said people don't want anything old, they just want everything new. And the people I talk to, I don't necessarily get that sense, but so maybe there is a way that we can better reach out to people who are looking to move into Lake Forest or looking to move around Lake Forest. Is there an opportunity to communicate more with real estate professionals and really make sure that there isn't a negative spin going out there, that there's an opportunity for someone who wants to come in and buy a historic home. There's all sorts of resources and opportunities for them to receive assistance. This whole concept of early intervention, although the city is limited from many perspectives on how much we can do at the front end, if there was an opportunity for residents to seek out guidance from community members, perhaps in a non-formal board and commission way, to understand who might be an architect or contractor who has worked on that type of a house, or is there some direction we can offer. So just that whole concept, is there an opportunity for peer reviews? And then just generally to offer public support. If there is an architect or a property owner or a contractor who continually produces high-quality projects, and the foundation is great about this, but having someone at those meetings to offer support in a public setting to the Building Review Board and Historic Preservation Commission. Think creatively. I think we do need to look at middle ground solutions. We can't always, as I said, achieve the optimum project. Look at adaptive reuse opportunities. Many examples in the community where we've done that in the past and opportunities in the future. Flexibility in zoning regulations. The recent council approval of granny flats, which actually is approval for a secondary living unit on single-family property. That's an example of a new way to offer financial incentives. And are there other financial opportunities? Are there grants? Are there ways that we can set up some type of community support? Obviously, the benefits of all this is reduced fear of the process, broader community support, and ownership of preservation. So it's not a small group, but it is a pervasive community philosophy, and that people understand that coming in. And generate excitement, really generate ownership and pride in why that is important to Lake Forest and why it helps us be who it is. And finally, about 2 years ago now, the City Council held a strategic planning session, was attended by probably about 50 or 60 local residents. Out of that came cornerstones of the community. And one of those concepts was that Lake Forest is best described by the things that matter most to the people who live here. And if we can generate that ownership and that pride in this community and its long-term traditions, I think we've all made everyone's job easier in assuring the future of this community.
Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I would like to make a brief nutshell presentation to describe to you what I feel are the advantages of working with a competent architect in Lake Forest. I shall describe the processes of working with an architect in general very briefly. Why should you hire an architect for your project? You can save time and money with these people. These design professionals can actually help you decide what you need to do. This streamlines the building process, provides vision and creativity to your project, helps you define your project. It also helps you navigate the complex process. And an architect also advocates on your behalf. And what type of an architect should you hire for your unique renovation project? I feel very strongly that when you select an architect to work in this community, that you should look for one that has expertise and experience in renovation work. Also important is an understanding of working in the community context here in Lake Forest. Certainly, you want to pick an architect that has strong design abilities, as well as problem-solving skills to work out the unique logistics of some of these complicated older vintage homes. Also, a knowledge of the city ordinance and review requirements is important. And also having a positive working relationship with city staff, as well as a knowledge of financial incentive programs that Suzanne will talk about shortly. And also, it's important that the architect have a strong relationship with local contractors and artisans. Now, I'd like to show in this slide, just for purposes of showing that not, unfortunately, are all architects as capable as the next. You see on the left some slides of a historic example at Williamsburg, and also an elegant little potting shed in the lower left-hand corner built in Lake Forest a few years ago. And on the right, there is, of course, the type of housing and architecture that can be built by some architects that don't subscribe particularly to the kind of aesthetics that we value in Lake Forest. Here we see a house built in Lake Forest about 10 years ago, juxtaposed with a not so historically accurate example. Now, where do you find a qualified architect to work with? You, of course, would like to get referrals from satisfied clients. You could seek out advice from your local preservation foundation. You can also go to the AIA directory. They have a website that actually will list architects that specialize in the type of project that you're interested in doing. And then also contractors are a good resource as well. And the steps in a preservation or renovation design project, these are very standard. First one is programming and building analysis. This is where you actually find out what will be the subject of the building project. Also, budget will be discussed. The next stage is preliminary design. This will work out what the building looks like and what the planned spatial flow will be. The next stage is design development. This is how the building will be built, with the structure, the mechanical systems, etc. Construction documentation. This is the phase where the architect will put together the blueprints and specifications. And then the bidding phase, the architect will also assist the builder in selecting contractors to solicit bids from, and also to qualify those bids. And then the construction phase is a phase during which the architect will administer the contract with the contractor and perform site observation during the construction process on the builders. Actually, what you've got is you've got three different parties working together, but in the traditional scenario, the architect is looking out for the best interests of the homeowner. Now again are the list of the important abilities of the architect. And what he's able to do sometimes, in some cases, is he'll be able to find out that sometimes you only need to significantly renovate interior spaces and not build on the exterior. This can save the homeowner a lot of money and expense on unnecessary additions. This happens to be a project in Lake Forest where we repurposed interior spaces so that we could put a kitchen and family room area in. This went through a review process with the city, and we had a very favorable experience. You can see we actually took a 2-story hunting trophy room that was rather dark and internalized and placed a nice light and well-lit family room with the master bathroom addition on top. These are some more photographs of that same building, and we just basically repurposed, without expanding outward at all, lots of internal spaces that were basically sort of wasted in today's contemporary living. And of course, sometimes you just need to remodel. This is the Presbyterian Church at Deer Path and Sheridan Road, and here we took the corner of the building that had a very nondescript door that was basically their main entry to the narthex. And through a lot of research in the historical archives, we were able to sort of reinsert the flavor of the open loggia that existed there. This project was also reviewed through the city process. It went to HPC, and we had a very favorable interaction with them. It's also, it was a very interesting project because we paid special attention to working with the right contractors that could reproduce that spotted brick that we had, or spotted stonework that we had to put in the corner. Sometimes you just want to restore, and in this case, Lake Forest Home on Mayflower was brought back to its original state as designed by the firm of Stanley and Anderson. This was another project that we took through the city review board process, and we tried to be very thorough in our submittals. And in the case of these last 3 projects that I've showed you, the review process was quite expedient, and we really had no problems with it at all. I think that the city basically is just looking for good design. Sometimes you need to add on, as this Victorian home on Illinois Road shows some previous rear additions that needed to be removed in order to make way for a new family room and kitchen. These types of projects add on to an existing home, but what they do is they ensure that moving forward, these homes will be more marketable, hence get better owners and survive into the next century. And we also went through a review process and had a good experience with that. You can see that the curving bay window here replicates the curving glass of the front elevation's tower. So again, you know, these projects require a lot of different components. You need to find the right artisans and contractors. You need to have good design abilities in order to integrate these spaces into not only the plan, but as well as the massing and elevations of these older homes. This you get when you hire a competent design professional from the beginning. It makes it so much easier on the homeowner. He does not have to worry about finding competent contractors. They'll be recommended by the architect. And the final result actually improves the property value and enhances the neighborhood. And I think that goes back to what Kathy's talking about, that that's ultimately the goal. We don't want to say no on the boards and commissions. We actually want to give a green light to improvements, which leads me to some interesting slides here, and I preface it with, you want to hire a competent architect from the beginning. When a project goes really well, you assume, well, it just should have happened that way, and what's the problem? But in the case of this particular project, there was an initial architect who just got in over his head. He wasn't really qualified for the type of a project this turned out to be, and during construction, a lot of unanticipated aspects of the aging home came up. The solutions that were chosen were really not very wise, and what happened about halfway through at the stage you can see in this particular image, and the one in the upper left-hand corner, was that the house was basically turning into a disaster. And the homeowner decided to engage our office, hoping that we would be able to bring the house back. And as you can see, it's an interesting project because it shows you how badly something can go, and then also how much better it can go if you find someone that's more sensitively in tune with how this building should be brought back. It had an addition, of course, that wasn't really very well suited to the house, and we tore that down and put a differently configured roof up. This is another addition that was done previous to this project that was replaced with the one on the upper right-hand corner, and you can see how the lakeside was also taken back to more of its original configuration. Here's an example of some detailing that speaks to the expertise in preservation, design, and classical detailing that you would want an architect you select to possess. And then, even though you may love pedigree, sometimes you just need new. And when that does happen, you want to seek a professional that can integrate a new building or new structures into the unique features of our landscape. And this is a project that shows an actual driveway bridge and a new home built within the allowable setbacks to a ravine on the east side of town. And one would think, if they were going to be talking to Art Miller's acquaintance from Winnetka, that something like this, described, in rhetorical terms, would be absolutely impossible in Lake Forest. This was probably one of the most enjoyable reviews by the Preservation Commission that I can remember. It was sort of like a love fest. And so I would say to people that are having bad experiences that perhaps what's happening is they're just getting bad consultants from the very get-go. I was on the Building Review Board and the Historic Preservation Commission for a dozen years. I figured I saw 150 petitions, 150 sessions perhaps, amounting to about 400 petitions. And it got to be almost without exception that it was the skill of the architect, because all these are architect-prepared petitions, submittals, that if the architect is sensitive and competent and has the proper abilities, it would be favorably reviewed. And it would be favorably reviewed because it would be a good project. The two go together. You have to remember this as I show you another slide of how this new building and bridge actually integrate into the natural landscape, I think in a very sympathetic manner. In fact, the plan is full of so many, not contortions, but so many adjustments to setbacks, property lines, steep slopes, and trees, that all those constraints actually provided us with the opportunity to do a little Lutyens-esque butterfly plan, which turned out to be actually kind of spectacular because it created all these little subset spaces. So sometimes I think that if it looks like it might be really difficult, it's just a test of that designer's ability. This one shows a transformation of actually a not so old structure in town here, where we just basically addressed the language of the home. This was reviewed by the city. We moved a driveway, created a forecourt. And finally, this was an example of how an architect that can address the local vernacular imagery and symbolism, can actually incorporate even to something other than a house, a very satisfying element that becomes part of our landscape. And finally, sometimes you may just want a new kitchen. And so with that, I complete my presentation. Thank you.
But that if you're doing a renovation or something, sometimes there's a lot of intellectual work that goes on that doesn't get translated into actual construction materials. And so the percentage of the fees shouldn't be based, when you're thinking about a renovation or something like that, on the amount of work that's going to be done by the others as a percentage, but more as to how much time goes into getting the right solution. So some people might consider that to mean the fees are high, but other people might consider that to be getting what you want, which is a good design that works. So you can't say that about the fees, but I'll just say that.
Could I bring you with to our preliminary meetings?
Thanks. I'm Suzanne Germann from Landmarks, Illinois, and it's great to be back in Lake Forest and see so many familiar faces. It's good to recognize people as I walk through the door. Sorry, you can't hear me? I'll try harder. I'm going to talk to you today about two tax incentive programs. One of them is not run by Landmarks, Illinois. It's actually a state-run program. So it's through the State Historic Preservation Office, the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, and it's the Property Tax Assessment Freeze Program. And I see Susan Benjamin in the back row there, and she will correct me if I am wrong on anything. So, the freeze program is available to any property, any residential property that is owner-occupied, that's located either within a local or national register historic district, or is individually landmarked as either a local landmark or individually listed in the National Register. And the property owner who would be going through a renovation would have to spend 25% of the assessed value of the property in this renovation. And as a benefit, as a reward for doing that, your assessed property value will be frozen for 8 years, and then it will step up for the following 4. What you have to keep in mind is that you do have to follow the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation on this work. And those are the same standards that the city uses in reviewing their projects for the HPC. So if you're in the local district, you're already doing this anyway for the exterior of your property. What's different is that the state will look at the interior. If you're doing interior work, they will look at the interior of the property as well. So so many things could qualify to get you up to this 25%. If you're re-roofing, if you're tuck pointing, that qualifies, as well as doing interior work as well, as long as it's meeting the standards. There is a process of, a review process of that's done by the state, but like I said, it's similar to how Kathy's going to look at it as well. It takes a while to do, and you have to be pretty detail-oriented about your project because they need to understand everything. It's best to call the state before you start any work so that it's well documented throughout the process. And then after the 12 years, your assessed tax value will move back up to where it would have been before the project began. The other program that I'm going to talk about is a program that is run by Landmarks, Illinois, and it's the Preservation Easement Program. And this program's been around since the 1970s, and it really ramped up in the early 2000s, but we haven't promoted the program since about 2007. But it is a legal agreement between the property owner and an organization, an easement holding organization such as Landmarks, Illinois, that we would protect the property, the exterior of the property in perpetuity. So the property could not be torn down and there could not be any insensitive alterations. We would have to review any changes to the exterior. In exchange for that, the property owner would be eligible for an income tax deduction. Now, over the last few years, there has been some scrutiny by the IRS that it makes it more difficult to get an income tax deduction. So that's why we haven't been promoting the program, for one thing. But we still see it as our strongest preservation tool out there. And we are willing to work with anybody who is willing to take that risk to work with the IRS after the easement donation. We hold about 35 easements here in Lake Forest. We have about 550 statewide, majority in the Chicagoland area. And part of that is, this is my job, is to monitor all of them annually. We will physically go out, visit the property, make sure that they are being preserved. But we also see it as a resource to the owner that we will show you what maintenance issues we see coming up that an average property owner may not see versus somebody who is well-versed in preservation and historic properties. And we'll call those to your attention so that you can bring in the appropriate person to maintain those buildings. And we will work with the property owner on any alterations that they need that we can work through getting it done appropriately. And on our, going back to what Guy was saying about finding the appropriate person to work on your property, I did put out a handout in the hallway that we have on our website, a resource guide for finding architects or anybody in the field of preservation, contractors, craftsmen. It's all on our website, but you can also feel free to call me and I can talk you through trying to find the appropriate person because the list is fairly long. So, and I'm trying to think of other things that you wanted me to talk about. I think that covers them in a nutshell, but I can certainly answer any specific questions you have about the two programs.
You said that the not promoting the thing, it has to do with the fluctuations in values for properties probably since 2007, not promoting that one. Makes it too complicated.
Yeah, although Congress passed legislation in 2006 to support the easement program, the IRS is looking at it differently and is saying that there is a less value to an easement donation than initially they were saying. So there is some, there's not agreement throughout the different bodies of the federal government as well as us. We would say that there is a value to the easement donation, whereas the IRS is questioning that. So I can certainly get into more specifics about that with anybody who would like to.
My name is Ingrid Bryzinski, and I'm here to talk about some experiences we've had since we've lived here for 19 years. We moved from Connecticut in 1996. We chose the town because we really fell in love with it. We loved the location, the lake, the school was good. Our son was in high school. And we were looking for the perfect house. So my husband had already transferred his job and had been looking at houses. And he said, I found a great house, great location, but you're going to hate the kitchen. And I thought, we just redid our kitchen in Connecticut. That's the wrong way to start out. And every house we looked at, I'd look and we'd say, okay, we like the ceilings, we like the staircase, don't like this, don't like that. And we finally decided we'd have to redo any kitchen anyway to have it be what we had previously. So when we walked into this house, I said, okay, we're fine, we can do it. And the first thing we did was to redo the kitchen. We were fortunate in that we had the same design firm that we had in Connecticut. They had just moved to Chicago. So that made us feel we were recreating a little bit of home. The reason we did the kitchen first, and because the house, as Art said, was built between 1889 and 1892, they had a very modern southwestern kitchen. And it just didn't, it just didn't fit. So we did that first, and we found out that the house had actually been a wedding gift to the children. It was the Tuttle Farwell that later turned Chandler family. And one of the ladies used to walk her dog by our house. She was in her 80s, and she would give us the history of the house, her coming out party, and where she had, where her brothers used to sit and throw tomatoes at people, and where the ice was delivered, and just a lot of really nice stories that made it really special to us. There was a west wing that was added in the 1920s. That then became our family room because in the old days they didn't really have an informal family room, and also our son's bedroom. I'll answer some questions too that Allison was nice enough to give me to talk to, but I thought I'd just give a little overview first. We did our master, so we had Stuart Cohen as our architect. We did not know Guy at the time. He really did the kitchen family room architecture, and there were two very large lolly columns that were off the kitchen, and they were in the children's sort of play area. And we wanted to get rid of them, and there was a large iron beam that was put in. And when I left, the contractor said, you know, don't be worried, the bedrooms might be down here when you come home from work, but it'll be fine. And it was fine. We knew it was, but it made a really big difference. We did our master bedroom next, but it was really more just updating, doing replastering. We have found that it's better to rip the old plaster down, because then what you see underneath is old electrical wires, old other things. Just get rid of all the old. We want it to look old, but we want to have the new mechanisms, the heat, everything as well. We were fortunate the previous owners had changed the oil to gas, so we didn't have to do that, but we had to fix some of the floorboards and things that still had the little holes from the radiators. So there were just little details. The biggest project I'd say we've undertaken was the living room, which was supposed to be a very easy project. It was a dark oak living room. The rest of the house has happy colors, pastels, and it was dark. And one of my husband's friends once said, hey, this is a great library. All you need is a pool table in here. And I was like, no, this is not a man cave. This is a living room. We're redoing this. What it grew to, what Stuart said was, you know, the door to the living room is very small, and the rest of the doors, we have some of the old doors that actually go into the walls. And he said, you know, you really need to make the door bigger. Okay, take out the bookcases, change the paneling, do the door. Well, then we decided our dining room was a little bit dark, and wouldn't it be nice if it opened up into the living room? So this year was fine, Thanksgiving and Christmas. Last Thanksgiving and Christmas, we had blue tarp up, which looked just lovely over the holidays. But it was worth it. It was a 9-month project, and it wasn't anyone's fault. It became scope creep. So as long as we're doing this, let's redo this. Well, as long as we're doing this plaster and everything is put away, let's redo this. And so it really became scope creep. But we're very, very happy with the results, and I would do it again. We also, there was a deck at the back of the house. We took that down, and we put in a limestone patio so that you actually walk out for the family room. There's the grill, and then you go down, and that's the sitting area. And we're very happy with that because it's more in touch with the age of the house. What we found, though, we had to close up some window wells that were in the basement. So there are always, you know, a few surprises, but it's nothing really that we couldn't live with. And I think one of the really good things about having an architect, as Guy said, is they know to plan for the surprises. You know, when we were knocking down a wall, they said, there's brick back here, so be prepared. This, you know, we have to then use other supports and do other things. And, you know, I think that really helped. Allison had said, what were the projects we tackled? I think I talked through that. We hired an architect. Actually, Stuart had been recommended by an architect in Connecticut. They knew each other, I'm not quite sure how, but he had said, oh, it's an old house, you know, give him a call, and we worked with Stuart and Julie. The benefits, again, really not a lot of surprises. We had the first for the kitchen and family room. We had a wonderful architect who'd since retired. We actually called him. He lives in Wisconsin now, and said, would you like to come back? He said, no, I'm really enjoying my retirement. But we had another gentleman from Evanston who also had some wonderful woodworkers, and we chose him because we wanted some nice moldings on the ceilings. And the architect had recommended this gentleman because his woodworkers were so good. And they really did a lot of work matching some of the old moldings, doing all of that, which is rather labor intensive. Any setbacks, really minor things. I mean, there was tile in the floor in the entrance. When we got there, we wanted to take it up. We knew there was wood underneath. We found it had been sanded so much already over the 150 years that we had to replace the floor. Okay, we replaced the floor. Originally, I was hesitant to redo the living room just because it was always cold in the winter, and in the summer it was a little clammy. So we had a professional engineer come in, and he said, tell me more about it. He said, I think your furnace is too small. We have 4 furnaces, and we had replaced the one. And he said, well, you just replaced it with whatever the previous owners had. He did some diagrams, and I think we had a size 3 furnace. We should have had a size 5. Now we can have everything open. The house is warm. It's been, you know, a big help. But that was really what we spent on the heating and the ductwork, and all of that was really more than we did in the decorative pieces, which people see. So the behind the scenes, the roots are really very important, and they do make a difference. I mean, we'd like to stay there 20 more years. I'm sure I'd like to have a little heat as I keep getting older. We have not done anything with the state federal tax incentives. We did look into the easement program, but you couldn't change the front of the house, which we actually haven't done. So perhaps we should have looked into that a little bit earlier. We really haven't changed anything on the outside other than the terrace, mostly the inside. And the city review process, we handed in our plans and we got the permit. I guess we didn't really do anything on the outside that was major from the street. I was impressed because when the gentleman came to inspect for the terrace, there were more than 3 steps. You needed a railing, and we had that. So, you know, I had not a negative experience at all. I mean, very, very fortunate.
Very much here is about landscaping, and you said that you did have some garden design work done also.
Yes, we had Craig Bergman actually design. We had an overall plan, a 5-year plan, which is we're still working on after 19 years. But we did, most people start with the front of the house, but our kitchen and family room face the back. And we really wanted to enjoy from our kitchen window the garden. My husband loves to garden. He's actually at a bonsai show today, but he loves plants. And Craig designed with the terrace development, a nice garden outside our kitchen window. And you can walk around that and see it from the whole backyard. We still have a ravine to do. We've put some bonsai in the side. My husband sort of came up with that. But we really haven't done anything major in the front yet. And my husband's dream is a greenhouse someday, so we'll see where that goes. But now Craig was very into the older trees, the older flowers, what was also appropriate for the community.
Roger.
A question for Kathy. To what extent is the real estate community, particularly the younger brokers, on board with briefing their clients on the preservation atmosphere?
The city does meet with the realtors quarterly. We hold a meeting at City Hall and we try and update them. Again, I think it's trying to build a relationship. So we really encourage realtors to call staff early on in the process. I also left out on the table at the realtors' urging, the City Council recently re-looked at the city's real estate rider. That is a document that the city last approved, I think, in 1998. And I have to admit, the version that was approved in 1998 read pretty harshly, and I think it was good information coming back from the realtors that wasn't really a user-friendly document. So with the help and review of some realtors, that was, I think, approved in February by the City Council. So look at that. But we do try and get that kind of information out, particularly the information that staff is available to provide general guidance. Again, certainly not to design the project. We encourage buyers or people who have homes to really seek a talented architectural firm. So I think we try and get that message out and encourage early communication with the city and to encourage the value of preservation. You may see some realtors actually go to the trouble of noting a property that may be historically significant. So I think there are those who try and promote the value of historic properties. I think there are others who may not be as familiar with that.
We especially want to thank our panelists who have really given us so much. And for those of you who asked questions, you've led us down new avenues. So thank you all.